me just say, first of all, how much I appreciate all of you being part of this Saturday afternoon experiment. And I believe this panel is going to make it worth your while. Moderating a panel discussion on the future of evangelicalism in light of Phyllis's wonderful presentation. It's a daunting job. But let me tell you one reason we're doing this. As Mike said, in January of this year, I wrote what was not that big a deal, 3 blog post series on the coming evangelical collapse. In March, the Christian Science Monitor asked me if they could take that piece and publish it in their online version. They did that in May, and it was immediately picked up by people like Real Clear Politics, and then the Drudge Report, which is a crazy experience. And there was no reason for this to happen. Nobody knew anything about me. I'm one of those guys, you know, in the basement, typing on a computer, wearing PJs. I've not got any sort of book or fame or anything like that. It was that title, Coming Evangelical Collapse. And for the next 6 to 8 weeks, all sorts of interviews, and everybody was really excited by this. Christians were excited about collapsing evangelicalism. Atheists were really happy. Bible Bob up in the holler, he was really interested. And it just occurred to me that this is a lot more interesting topic than many people think. And a lot more interest in it. Some of it because we don't have such a great reputation. Some of it because a lot of us are trying to find our own place in the map. On today's panel, we are not going to spend all of our time saying there's nothing to talk about because evangelicalism doesn't exist or doesn't matter. We're going to at least believe in Santa Claus for a few minutes. I freely admit that this limited panel can't give every important perspective. I freely admit that evangelicalism can be doubted, deconstructed, contextualized, despised, redefined, redecorated, and made to vanish with academic magic. Like many of you, I am an evangelical, even though I don't want to be most of the time, don't exactly know what it is, and I'm pretty sure God has no idea what an evangelical is either. It may be the most embarrassing and hated family in the world, or the most loved by other people, but after being an evangelical for half a century, I'm not sure that I could be anything else or understand why I am one. So, without an accompanying lecture on what is an evangelical, which is the 20 minutes that needs to happen before any panel discussion, we're going to press on. The question to get all of us going, and let me sit down, is this. Tony, we'll start with you and go that direction. What do you learn about the future of the church from what you've seen at Cornerstone 09?
I think it's fascinating. I think Cornerstone is actually a fascinating kind of reflection of what's going on in American Christianity in general, and particularly in evangelicalism. I don't know so much about the shifts in the music, because I think the music at Cornerstone there's always been an element of kind of prophetic bands that speak out against the abuses in the church and things of that nature. But I know that up where we spend our days, up here in the speakers area, there's been a shift in the last several years from a more traditional conservative evangelical menu, seminars on pro-life, seminars on conservative evangelical apologetics, things of that nature, to much more openness on some of the hot political issues, so both sides are represented, and giving the message that you could be evangelical and be affirming of GLBT persons in the church. Not that that's the only perspective here, but that now there's a balance of perspectives. There's a lot more talk about creation care. There's a lot more talk about working in the abandoned urban places in America. So I think that is part of the great emergence that Phyllis is talking about, and if I were to sum it up, it would be that another way to think of Phyllis's quadrants is there was a version of Protestantism that was very head-based, and it was the liturgical and the mainline Protestant, the theological, and it tended to attract suburban, white, intellectual, educated kind of people. And the social justice and the Pentecostal was a more bodily, earthy spirituality that tended to attract more urban people and less affluent people. And I see the coming together of the head Christianity and the heart Christianity, and I see that reflected in these tents over here.
Great answer. What do you see at Cornerstone 09 that tells you about the future of the church, Patrick?
Well, not to put someone on the spot out here, but I had a conversation last year, which was my first visit, with Glenn Kaiser sitting there in the back. And one of the questions I asked was, Glenn, is Cornerstone something like symptomatic of movements in evangelicalism, or is it a crockpot? And he kind of had the perplexed look for a moment, and he said, I think it's the crockpot. So I've been pondering that for about a year and thinking, okay, what's cooking when you throw all of this into one pot and see what comes out of it? It's not necessarily symptomatic of larger movements. It contains more than that, and something, I don't hesitate to say this, something new seems to be being birthed here all the time. And I thought it was a good metaphor for me to continue to reflect on. So what I see both here, 09, and feeding from my experience last year, is very hopeful. The hope comes in a couple of different ways. One of them is when we start asking what evangelicalism is, that's actually a good thing, rather than taking for granted that we know what it is. We've already got a grammar problem. What used to be an adjective has now become a noun. Something was in accordance with the gospel is the way that evangelical would have been used, and it's become an identity marker. And it's good to question that and think about it and wonder what that means. The other sign of hope that I've seen for the last 2 years, and I think the presentation here and the emphasis on the emergent movement is part of this, is that evangelicals are realizing that Christianity is older than the last 150 years. It's actually older than the Reformation. And the Reformation wasn't the pivotal event of church history. And so to be reaching back, to use a phrase like McLaren's, reclaiming ancient practices, is a way of saying, you know what, that stuff belongs to all of us. The liturgy, the contemplative practices, ways of being that have come to us through the plurality of the churches, Catholic, Orthodox, Syriac, Coptic, etc. That history belongs to all of us. It's not something that we separate ourselves from as evangelicals and leave the rest to the historical churches. And I see that as very hopeful whenever we reach back to the past and say, that's ours too. Let's make use of it, and let's bring it into our practices now. So I'm one who's very hopeful from what I see here circulating. It's a good crock pot.
Join the discussion at PROFRAH.com.